Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this pre-application Q&A webinar. We're really pleased that so many of you could join today, and we hope you find it useful. I'm Gina Crane. I'm Director of Communications and Learning here at Esmée. I'm here with my colleagues Genevieve and Will, who will share more detail behind what we're looking for and how we make decisions, and my colleague Luna, who will facilitate the question part of this session. Our colleagues Salma, Alison, and Larissa are also on hand in the background. Oh, and Halima, we've nearly forgot you, sorry, Halima, to help with the Q&A. For accessibility, we also have Nana and Altan, who will be providing British Sign Language interpretation and interpreting what is spoken live. We've also asked the speakers to describe themselves and where they are. So I'll begin. I'm Gina. I'm a middle-aged white woman. I'm wearing glasses. I'm at home in Peterborough in England. I'm going to pass to Will.
Hello, I'm Will Steadman. I'm funding manager at Esmée in the Our Natural World team, which is the environment side of our grant making. I'm a white male in my late 30s, and I'm at home in my office in West Sussex. And I will pass to Luna.
Thanks. Well, I'm Luna. I'm a brown woman of Southeast Asian descent. I've got long black hair and a blue dress on and bright orange earrings. I'll pass on to Jen.
Hello everyone, I'm Genevieve Ford-Saville. I'm a funding manager in the Fairer Future team. I am a mixed Afro-Caribbean woman. I've got dark brown skin, I have dark brown hair and dark brown eyes. I'm currently wearing a cream roll neck jumper and I'm at home with a background of some soft fairy lights.
Thanks, Jen, Will, Luna, and everyone. So just a few housekeeping practicalities before we begin. There's this information also in the chat if you forget it. Live captioning is available for this session. There's a link in the chat if you'd like to see the captions in a separate window. You can also click the closed captions button at the bottom of this window to see them within Zoom. You can post questions at any point using the Q&A facility, which you'll find at the bottom of your screens. I'd encourage you to look at the questions already submitted and vote for the ones that you'd really like to see answered as well. You can do this by clicking the thumbs up icon next to the question. As mentioned, we'll also have Luna, Salma, Alison, Larissa, and Halima typing responses to questions in the Q&A. We will try to answer as many questions as we can, and we'll prioritise the questions that are upvoted, so the ones that you give the thumbs up to. If there are questions we miss, and I think today it's inevitable there will be, we will answer them afterwards. So we'll also be using this session to update our frequently asked questions section on our website, and you might find the answer to your question is already there if you have a look. So we are expecting a lot of questions, and it can be difficult to follow the chat, listen to people, look at the slides. So please don't worry if you miss anything. We're recording this. We're going to share the transcript with additional questions. And as we said, there are those frequently asked questions you can also look at. So yeah, let's start the presentation and look at the slides. Okay, this is an overview of what this session will contain. A welcome and plan for the session. We're going to have a quick introduction to Esmée, then what we don't fund and what we're looking for, what we consider when making decisions, a bit about our application process, and then time for questions. As a bit of background, we started holding these pre-application Q&A webinars because we know that you want to ask us questions before applying to Esmée, and we just can't speak to you all individually. We had 600 people sign up to this webinar, so hopefully this is a good way to ensure that your questions are answered. We make changes after every webinar to the next one based on your feedback, and we'll ask you for your thoughts following this one as well. We want to use most of the time to answer questions, so we'll try to limit our part and leave time for that. We're aware that we really need to strike a tricky balance. We want to be more transparent as a funder, but we need to be absolutely honest. We're not holding this webinar to encourage more applications because we're still continuing to make a similar number of grants. We know that need is rising in the sectors we support, and as a funder that is open to applications, we've been receiving more applications. So we need to do more to save people, you, time from spending your precious time applying to us when it isn't likely we'll fund your work. We hope this webinar might help you decide whether you should invest your time in applying to us or if your efforts might be better focused elsewhere. We want to answer as many questions as possible, but we know that the main question for most of you is, will Esmée fund my work? And I'm sorry, but the answer for most of you statistically is going to be no. We won't be able to give you one-to-one advice or feedback about your own organisation, but we really hope this will give you a clearer picture of what we are looking for, how we make decisions, and how we use our application process to do that. So yeah, a bit about Esmée. So we have a strategy which will run until the end of 2027, which focuses on three main aims: improving our natural world, securing a fairer future, and strengthening the bonds in communities in the UK. So that's creative, confident communities, that last one. So as well as assessing and managing grants, our funding managers are exploring other ways we can be more proactive in making progress towards our goals, including inviting applications themselves, commissioning research, convening, co-design, and using our influence. Okay, the next slide has a very colourful image of our funding aims, our impact goals, our priorities. We're not going to go into this in detail here, and it's a little bit blurry, so you can find details of our strategy, including a full text version suitable for screen readers on the website. On the website, you'll also find full funding guidance, more information on each priority, including the long-term outcomes we want to contribute to over the course of our strategy, and examples of organisations and work that we've funded as part of that. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Will.
Hi, so I'm going to run through a few facts and figures here. So on this slide, in practical terms, we show some numbers that show the size and the shape of our grant making towards the aims and priorities in our strategy. We choose to focus our funding mostly on a relatively small number of long-term and core cost grants because we know that that's what organisations want and need. Typically, our grant budget for the year is between 45 and 50 million. And last year, so 2024, we made 241 grants across our 13 funding priorities. 94 of those were to organisations we haven't funded before, with the remaining 2/3 or so going to organisations we've funded at some point in the past. Next slide, please. This slide details the areas that we don't fund, so our exclusions. I won't go through those line by line. They're available on our website, but it is important everyone reads those. I'll just kind of highlight a few areas. So legally charitable is the definition of the work that we fund. There's some examples of that. People do fall down on that sometimes on the eligibility quiz. So just make sure you're aware of what legally charitable means. Because our focus is on long-term grants for work with more of a strategic focus, we don't fund very small organisations. So we have a turnover clause there, and you'll see that's 100,000. So yeah, do read all of that in detail before putting in an expression of interest. Next slide, please. So this summarises briefly what we're looking for. So we want applications that show you are leading the way yourselves, or part of a partnership or collaborative movement, that you're driving change for the future by doing either something new or using a tried and tested model to push things forward, and you're aiming to make a lasting difference, reaching beyond those directly engaged. So not just benefiting beneficiaries that are part of a project, but broader than that. So perhaps influencing government policy or practice at a national level. I'm going to give two examples now of what this looks like in reality from our natural world grant portfolio. So one example looking at under our nature-friendly farming priority, and one example under our space for nature priority. And hopefully this will kind of bring to life what we're looking for in a real-life example. And all our grants data is on 360 Giving if you want to look at it in more detail. So under Space for Nature, we made a core cost grant to an organisation called Northern Ireland Environment Link. It's a networking forum and body for environmental charities in Northern Ireland, brings together other charities under an umbrella so they can work collaboratively. And they have a piece of work called Landscapes NI, which is a new initiative launched last year. We're funding a full-time position that oversees that initiative, a development officer role. Why are we supporting it? Well, so Northern Ireland has a number of areas of outstanding natural beauty. These cover about 25% of the land area. But the legislation in Northern Ireland, it falls slightly behind that of England, Scotland and Wales. It dates from the 80s, and it doesn't really place any requirements for protection, management or resourcing of those areas. So they're actually not very well protected as landscapes go. And the aim of this work is to really kind of push for greater protection and legislation, so influencing the government there and bringing more funding in to protect those landscapes. So that's an example of what we're looking for, in that it's a partnership, it's a collaboration, it's strategic, it's working across a large area, and it is pushing for policy change. So that's an example there. And then under our farming priority, we are funding a group called the North East Cotswolds Farmer Cluster. It's a group of 160 odd farmers working together at a landscape scale to regenerate farmed land and build local food networks in the Cotswolds. So this covers 47,000 hectares, so you can get a real sense of the scale there. It's across multiple counties, Gloucestershire and Oxfordshire. And we are funding that core costs over 3 years. Why are we supporting that? Well, the scale of nature decline in the UK, it's very serious, and it can't be addressed through just funding things like nature reserves, which cover only a small proportion of the land. 70% of the land, by contrast, is farmed land. So we really need to change the way that that land is used to create more space and opportunity for nature recovery alongside food production. And farmer clusters are a kind of relatively new and emerging way of doing this. So working at scale, working together collaboratively, working with county councils, working with corporates that are in the area, utility companies, and bringing investment into a landscape to help regenerate it. So that's an example there under our farming priority. I will now pass on to Jen to talk a little bit more about what we're looking for and give some examples under our other Fairer Future priority.
Thanks, Will. Hi, everybody. So to carry on what we're looking for in organisations that are interested in funding, we are looking for unusual collaborations and ambitious partnerships. So we're interested in who you're working with, where you're networked, what relationships you have, and how you see opportunities to make change happen collaboratively by building connections and movements. We're interested in work that connects across our aims. So you may be doing work that is relevant within more than one area for a future, or across for a future, and for example, creative confident communities. That is fine and interesting, and we are interested in the kind of multiplication of the impact potential through that. We are interested in communities who are leading the way in terms of change. So where people who are most affected by an issue are themselves driving the change around that issue. So we're interested in work that we could call led by. And we're interested in work that is looking towards prevention, and interested in work that is looking toward making sustainable long-term change. So an example of this in our Fairer Future programme might be an organisation we fund called Stopwatch, and you can see more about Stopwatch in the case studies on our website. Stopwatch is an organisation that is led by people most affected by stop and search, and it is an organisation that exists to try and end stop and search. And it's a coalition, so it has this approach of bringing together different actors from different sectors. It's got legal experts, academics, citizens, civil liberties experts coming together to use both grassroots voices and policy and advocacy work to affect change. And this is something that we want to see in terms of the work we're interested in. It's looking at long-term change around policy and advocacy and bringing those collaborations together, driven by the voices of those people most affected by the issues that they are working on. So moving forward to what we do when we're making decisions and the things that we consider. We are going to be considering your track record and looking at your impact and your success previously, and includes thinking about your learning and your ability to build on when things didn't go according to plan. We know things won't always go according to plan. That's absolutely fine. And then sometimes there can be sort of fear when speaking to funders about saying this didn't work. That's absolutely fine. It's about what learning is taken from those experiences and what happens next. We're really interested in the connections that you have to other people and to other work that might be in our existing portfolio. So because we have a limited budget, we're interested in how we can make the most impact with what we have available. And if your work connects with other organisations' work to maximise impact, that's interesting. So its connections are really interesting to us. We're interested in the broader context of your work. So what are the opportunities and the barriers? So for example, we have a new government at the moment, thinking about what the opportunities and the barriers might be in relation to particular policy areas with a new government, for example. Who are the allies and the collaborators in the sectors that you're working in? And what do you understand to be the levers for change? Where are the opportunities? What are the things that would need to be worked on to create sustained change? And the other thing we're looking for when we're making decisions is what difference would our money make? Why us as a funder? What value do we specifically potentially bring to your work as opposed to a different funder? So those are the issues that we are considering when we are making decisions about applications. And by submitting an expression of interest to us, you are telling us that you are interested in doing work with us. We, as Gina said at the start, we turn down a lot of applications, unfortunately. Lots of people who apply to us are not going to be successful, and we do have to make judgments. We hope that by having these webinars, it makes it easy for you to understand what's going on kind of behind the curtain, as it were. We have to make judgments on all the applications. This hopefully helps you understand how we make those judgments. And we are considering all of these things from our perspective. We have a strategy that we are aiming to deliver. So we're considering your work in the context of how it relates to our strategy. If we turn you down, it's not because your work isn't great, it's because it's not the best fit for our current strategy, essentially. Okay, having said that, let's talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we also consider this when we're considering your expression of interest and when we're considering proposals as well. We consider diversity, equity, inclusion, and we call it DEI for short, for all applications that come into us. And in our application process, you will be asked to complete a DEI monitoring form. This conforms to the DEI data standard, which you can find out more about on our website. And we will ask you to fill that form in when you put an expression of interest in. If the application then makes it to the next stage, it's the proposal stage, we will ask you some more questions about your approach to DEI in a more nuanced way throughout your work. And that would happen through a conversation. In some areas of our strategy, we will be prioritising organisations that are led by people with lived experience of issues. So you remember I spoke about the case study earlier, that organisation is led by, and that is a priority across our Fairer Future programme. We know that our eligibility criteria are a barrier for some organisations that are led by and experiencing especially racial inequality or disability led. And we are exploring how to tackle this with our New Connections funding programme, which has been supporting organisations that, for example, don't meet our current income threshold or governance thresholds, because we're aware that historically funders have created systems which disproportionately disadvantage particular communities, especially racial minoritized communities, disability-led communities, for example. So based on the DEI data that we gather about who we're funding and who our funding is reaching, last year, nearly half of the grants we made went to organisations that were led by people who faced structural inequality as a result of their identity or their lived experience. And there's more information about how we use our DEI data and what we've gathered recently on our website. So we'd encourage you to go and have a look at our website to check that out. And I think Luna has shared a link to this in the chat for you. Next, we're going to show you a little video on our application process.
There are 6 steps to apply. 1. Take our quiz to check you meet the minimum eligibility criteria. You'll be asked quick questions on the funding you're seeking and your organisation. The quiz takes a few minutes. 2. Read our funding guidance. It has 3 sections. A, more detail on how to apply, B, what we do and don't support, and C, our strategy and funding priorities. Sections A and B take 30 minutes to read. For C, our strategy, read the parts relevant to your work. You'll find information on the outcomes we are focusing our support on. 3. If you think Esmée is a good fit for your work, submit an expression of interest. Use this to tell us briefly what work you would like Esmée to support, about the change you're focused on achieving, and how your organisation is well placed to deliver it. You'll have 300 words. We'll also look at your website to learn more about your organisation and work. You'll hear from us within 4 weeks to let you know whether we'll take your application further. 4. If your work is a potential match, we'll invite you for a conversation to learn more. The conversation will cover fit to our strategy, your approach, and your track record. 5. If your plans are a strong fit, we'll invite you to submit a proposal. You'll have 3 months to submit a proposal. If you already have a document that describes your work and shows how your work aligns with our strategy, you can use this. 6. After receiving your proposal, we'll invite you for a follow-up conversation. We'll then do a detailed assessment of your application. We aim to give you a decision within 3 months of receiving your proposal. There are 6
Very good. I'm just gonna, I feel like that video has pretty much done my job for me, but I'll run you through in a little more detail the kind of behind the scenes work that we do on expressions of interest. So we use that as a basic screening process. So firstly, checking that your organisation and your work meets our minimum eligibility criteria and that it's a good fit for our funding priorities. Is it leading the way, driving change for the future? Is it aiming to make a lasting difference? So we look at in detail all of that. We'll check your website and any other publicly available information, for example, on the Charity Commission website, and make judgments on that. So for those that look like there is a potential match, we'll invite either a phone call or a Teams or Zoom call to kind of get to know you a little bit better and to go into some more detail on the expression of interest, given that it's only 300 words. Next slide, please. So here we're going to just share a couple of facts and figures on the numbers of applications and success rates. So this is based on very up-to-date data from last year. 7% of the expressions of interest that come in through the website with no previous contact, what we might call a cold application, only 7% are invited through to submit a full proposal. So that is quite a low percentage. Of those that are invited forward for a proposal, 84% will receive a grant. So the success rate goes up dramatically once you're invited to submit a full and detailed proposal. That's because we're only focused on inviting those that appear to match our strategy and have the strongest chances of success. For the expressions of interest that we invite ourselves, kind of proactive grant making, success rate is much higher. So you'll see 91% of those expressions of interest were invited to a full proposal and 94% received a grant. We're mindful of bias. You know, we ask the same questions whether it's a cold expression of interest or an invited one. But for those obviously organisations that we've funded before, we do use our existing knowledge and learning on those grants to factor into our decision making. I'll now pass over to Gina.
Thanks. So a question that's already come up in the Q&A, unsurprisingly, is how do we get on your radar, or how do you get on our radar? It's obvious that so it's important for Esmée to remain open to applications, as well as it being important for us to support organisations that are already known to us and to make new connections ourselves. So there are two ways that we learn about organisations' work. One is by us proactively seeking it out. We attend sector and community events, we carry out research into areas of work, and we follow up on recommendations from people we fund or people we work with. The other is through submitting expressions of interest on our website. So interestingly, we have been increasing the support we're giving to organisations we haven't funded before. So in 2024, that we've already mentioned, 39% of grants that we made were given to 94 organisations that we hadn't previously funded, and half of those came in via the website. Of the grants we made last year, a third of them, so 33%, came via the website, via expressions of interest and our open process. So I would say if you want to get on our radar, the best way to do that is still to put in an expression of interest. Back to Genevieve.
Thanks, Gina. So what makes a good expression of interest? This is a question we understandably get asked a lot. We've offered you an example in this slide. This is an example from Participate Projects Bradford. They have kindly consented to us sharing this with you. Their application came into our Creative Confident Communities programme, and it aligned well with our funding priorities for community-driven enterprise and communities working together for change. So this was an uninvited expression of interest that came through the website. So it's someone we haven't funded before. I'm not going to read it out to you, but it's there for you to have a look at your leisure. But I will highlight what we think makes it a good expression of interest, and what we think generally makes a good expression of interest. Firstly, I'd say being clear about what it is you're asking for funding for. So practically speaking, what is it you need the money to achieve, and being clear with us what that looks like. So you could provide an example in a line or two in the expression of interest. And then using the rest of the space to talk about what your work looks like in relation to our strategy. So one of the challenges sometimes is people want to talk about their organisation and its background, for example, in the expression of interest. However, we will have a look at your website as part of the initial assessment process, so we can find out some more about your organisation and its track record there. So it's probably better to prioritise using the expression of interest space to focus on your work in relation to our strategy. And what we're looking for is for you to give us a strong sense of what you're aiming for, and a strong sense that you understand what the levers for change look like and how you're going to get to that strategic change that you want to see happening. If that relates to specific places or specific communities, explaining the relevance around that. We're looking for potentially some information about any partnerships that you might be involved in that are key to delivering this piece of work. And it also being clear that, referencing what we were talking about earlier, that the work might well be led by, if that's the case, being clear about that it's being led by people at the heart, that local communities at the heart of the change. And we'd also like you to sort of give us a brief description of, as I was saying, what the activities would look like, and talk about how they connect to the broader systems change that you are looking to achieve. So if you have a look at the example at your leisure, you'll see that all those things are included in that example, and that is what makes it a really good expression of interest for us. And we recognise it is a challenge. It's a limited word limit to get everything in. We appreciate that it's hard. We do know that. We appreciate it. But hopefully these tips give you a bit of a steer on what to prioritise within that word limit.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks, Gina and Will. So we are now going to move on to the Q&A. I know the team behind the scenes are already answering some questions. We still have quite a lot to get through. We're probably not going to get through them all, and I know that it'll be hard to keep track of all the things that are going on, but we will, just to reiterate what Gina said at the start, that we will have the recording and all the questions, whether they're answered live or given written answers, and ones that we were not able to answer during this hour, we'll answer those and we'll share those along with the recording after the webinar, so you will be able to catch up on anything that you've missed. We are going to start with a few questions that were sent in advance. So Alison asked a question about annual turnover in terms of how we assess this. This is because their latest set of accounts shows a turnover of just under 100k, but they have had in previous years, recently they have had a turnover of over 100k. And for this, within this accounting period, they do also have a further amount and memorandum of understanding with a further amount coming within this accounting period. But yeah, it's not quite as straightforward. But Gina, I think, are you able to answer this?
Yeah, so there's a couple of other questions I'll pick up as well that were in the Q&A that were about the 100k limit. I mean, I first of all have to say, I'm sorry, it is a hard limit for people applying via the website. And there is a reason for this. And the reason is quite a few years ago, we had 5,000 applications per year. And we really looked at thinking about the time cost of that for the sector. I think we were making 300 grants, and we really needed to reduce the number of people applying. So we looked at who we were funding and what sort of things that we could use, objective reasons we could give to people not to apply, because I think we can talk about our strategy, but our strategy at the time was particularly broad and everyone thinks they fit the strategy. So we did really look at who are we actually funding, and annual turnover was a really key thing. We just weren't funding anyone with a turnover of under £100,000 a year. So that's why we set the limit. So we're really aware that the majority of charities and charitable organisations, non-profits in the UK, do have a turnover of under of that. We know that. But we were targeting our support at larger organisations. And that's why we have that limit. We are always looking at that. It is a live conversation. We take on board the questions you ask here, feedback via our feedback surveys, and we are thinking about it, particularly in terms of equity. Jen mentioned that historically underfunded organisations aren't given the chance to build up this a turnover of £100,000 a year. So we have been proactive at reaching out and funding smaller organisations. We have a program called New Connections, where we fund organisations working for racial justice, nearly all of whom have a turnover of under that limit. And we are thinking about that where we do a targeted funding program, we might drop the requirement. We did a funding ask for youth-led creativity where that was not one of our criteria. So this is a live conversation, but I'm sorry, but at the moment you have to have a turnover of £100,000 or over.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So the next question that came in advance is from Jeff about eligibility for an approach. So they are not a constituted organisation, but they are doing work that has been funded before. I mean, I will say what their approach is. It's called the Make It Happen Fund. But because through our eligibility form, we don't fund unconstituted organisations, so they're asking about what's the best way to I guess get on the radar again, or how could they apply. Will, is this a question that you can take?
It is, yeah. I mean, to make an application, there needs to be a lead applicant organisation which meets our eligibility criteria. So in the case where you've got a project or an initiative or a partnership which isn't its own organisation, but is just a group or an idea or an approach, that's fine, but you would need to locate a kind of host organisation, a fiscal host, who can apply on your behalf. And ideally that would be an organisation that meets our criteria and that is able to, if the grant is awarded, receive the money and then essentially distribute it to you, and you'd have an agreement that would cover that. So that's what to do in this example.
Thanks, Will. And sorry, I'm going to stay with you for another question. This one came in from Chris or Christine. This is about funding for work on climate change.
Yeah, so we don't have a specific climate priority. Climate change is what we call a cross-cutting commitment. So it applies to all of our funding priorities and everything we do as a foundation. So what that looks like is, for example, we are aiming towards our investments being net zero by 2040. We are decarbonising our operations as a charity. We are educating ourselves about climate change. So it runs through everything we do. In terms of our environmental funding priorities, there isn't a climate one, but if you look in detail at the priorities we do have, climate is actually featured in all of them. So for example, we've got a funding priority on peat. Peat is a climate superpower. A lot of carbon is stored within peatlands, for example, and we're looking to protect and restore those, and that has an influence on climate change. And we've got a food and farming priority. Climate is a huge the food system is a huge driver of climate change. So if we address and make progress in the food system, that has an impact on climate change. If you can't see a clear fit for your work under our existing priorities, you might want to look at a climate-specific funder, and there are lots of them. And I think I've got your email, so I can share a list of appropriate funders afterwards.
Thanks, Will. Give you a bit of a break now. Jen, I'm going to go to you next. But oh no, sorry. Oh yeah. A question from Wendy about guidance, our guidance mainly around children and young people's rights. So they have a project which kind of crosses a number of our priorities, including our natural world and also children and young people's rights. They're a community working together to improve nature with young people, and they wish to see young people given the support they need to speak out for their green futures in line with the UN's Convention on the Rights of the Child. I won't read the full question, but we have shared these in advance. Jen, are you able to take that, please?
Oh yeah. So this is a question about meeting more than one priority, or meeting being across our areas. Which is absolutely fine. It's great to meet more than one. I would say it's important that you meet at least one very strongly. So it will be about looking through our website, our guidance, and seeing which of our priority areas you think you meet most strongly, and which of the outcomes goals within one of those priority areas you meet most strongly, and thinking about shaping your expression of interest around that. So for example, in children and young people's rights, we have an outcomes goal, which is young people with experience of injustice create and lead positive change. So this piece of work might fit within that. So if it's about young people, harking back to what I was saying earlier, the people most affected by the issue are the ones whose voices are speaking most loudly about the change and are leading the change. If young people are leading the campaign and leading the work within this organisation on the issues that are most important to them, and they happen to be climate change, that's great. It's about young people's voice and about what they are most important, what's most important to them being centred, and then being supported to do their advocacy and policy work around that. So I'd say, yeah, it's fine to be applicable across more than one of our priorities, but it might be helpful to work out which one you think you're most closely aligned to, and check that you are very closely aligned to at least one, and an outcomes goal within that priority, and think about shaping your expression of interest around that. But if you meet more than one, that's absolutely fine. And we have internal kind of coding that sort of sorts applications, but that's an us problem, not a you problem.
Thanks, Jen. So last question sent in advance. This is from Andrew asking about grants awarded for the difference between grants awarded for new organisations to Esmée and grants awarded to organisations we already have an existing relationship with. They wanted to know whether there was a difference in terms of the amount awarded and the length of term. Gina, you're going to take this one.
Yeah, so effectively, do we treat organizations that are new to us differently? Do we give them more money, less money? What do we do? And the answer is we deal with everything on a case-by-case basis, looking at our strategy. So there are examples of very new organizations to whom we have given lots of money or very big grants because they have a track record, bring with them people who have a track record in different sectors and are meeting a specific need that we think is really innovative or important for our strategy. So it really does depend on the work they're doing, their track record, the issues that we talked about in terms of how they work and what contribution they could make to our strategy.
Thank you. So moving on to the questions in the Q&A facility, I know there are lots and we've got just over 15 minutes, but I'm going to go to Cara's question. To what extent does Esmée prioritise partnership applications?
I can do this.
Jen or Will or Gina, did you want to take that?
Just from an overview point of view, so I'm Director of Communications and Learning, so we look at all the learning from all of our funding, and we recently shared a report about working in partnership and how we're learning from the organisations we support about making partnerships work. Looking at our grant data, who we're funding, absolutely everyone we're funding is working in partnership with someone. There are no instances of people who are not doing that, and how you do that and how that manifests in your work is something that we would definitely think about in assessing applications. Partnership applications, the complexity of putting that together and how to do that. I think that's really particularly important in some sectors rather than others. And I would say, looking at our funding, creative confident communities, particularly community-led change, that is really important. Thinking about who's in that partnership. Are you bringing together people from public, voluntary, and corporate sectors? That's something that's specifically in our guidance. I don't know if there's anything anyone wants to add, Will or Jen.
I could add that picking up what Will was saying earlier, we do need a lead person to be doing the application, so that a lead organisation has to be making the application rather than sort of a partnership of 2 or 3 or 4 putting it in together. It needs to be one organisation applying to Esmée, but then the work to be in partnership is great. As you were saying, that's something that's important to us, and we pretty much always fund that. I would add also that the partnerships need to be genuine and meaningful. So we will be checking what the partnership arrangement looks like, how the relationships work, if we get to the point of kind of getting a proposal in and doing further assessment on it. So it needs to be that the organisations involved are all active and happily in that partnership, and we need to understand how those relationships are going to be working in order to take the application forward.
Great, thank you. So next question comes from Jonathan. Does Esmée have any expectations in terms of funded charities influencing systemic or policy change alongside delivering their direct services to the communities they serve? And Michelle's added, is there a weighting applied?
I can begin to answer this one maybe. So we have quite a few organisations that do both these things, and there's often organisations who may have started out doing frontline service delivery and work, then want to do systemic change work because they want to change the issue that's constantly affecting the people that they're supporting. That's quite common. We don't fund frontline service delivery, we don't fund the direct one-to-one provision, but we do fund the policy work, and often the information, the learning that is being gathered from the one-to-one work is informing what needs to happen at the policy level. So we absolutely fund organisations that do both, but just not for the one-to-one work, the frontline service delivery. We only fund for the strategic policy work. So I'd say, I hope that sort of answers the balance question as well, because we're only going to be funding one element of that, and we don't mind at all that you also do the other bit, but we wouldn't be funding that bit.
Thanks, Jen. So that I know there's been a few questions about lived experience and how we use the DEI data standards. So Rob asked a question around, well, basically I won't read the whole question. There are a few questions around this, but just how we assess that in the applications. And what I would say is if you are applying and you complete the DEI monitoring form, there will be space, a free text box where you can talk a bit more about what this means to you, what that lived experience means to you, how communities most affected by the issues that you're working in help to shape what it is that you do. And that's the thing that's really important to us. And actually, in terms of the numbers that we use, that it's 75%, I think, of the board, that's how we identify organisations as being led by, and that what we use to report on who our funding is reaching. But yeah, Jen, well, you might want to say a bit more about how this information is assessed. Like, we will assess all of the information that's given to us in the application form, in your EOI, and also in your DEI monitoring form. Jen, well, is there anything else you'd like to say?
Only that I suppose it depends also on the sector you're working in, the context there. So speaking from a environment sector perspective, we know that that sector is not as like racially diverse as other sectors, although it is making progress. So we would view, we would take that context into consideration, and we would look at the actions that you are taking to perhaps diversify your board or your staff team, or signing up to initiatives like the race report and other good work that's happening in the sector. But that, we might take a slightly different approach when looking at it through a fairer future lens, for example.
Could
Thanks,
I just add
yes,
something, since there's so many questions, if that's okay? I guess this is thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion on 3 levels. So it's thinking about it in terms of our strategy. So there are areas of our strategy where we do want to prioritize organizations that are led by people with lived experience of the issue they're trying to address. And those are in our fairer future priorities mostly, but we're also thinking about how we do that within other areas of the strategy, particularly in the environment sector, but we're sort of doesn't apply across the whole portfolio. So those will be clear from the strategy. The other thing is you as an organization, how you define whether you're led by, and we do have a bar by which we're measuring our progress as how equitable we are as a funder, and we use that, but you should also define it yourself. So if for you, being led by is half of your staff or half of your trustees, you will have a space to say that when you apply and when you submit your DEI data. But the main purpose of us collecting DEI data is to tackle bias amongst the funding sector and ourselves, for us to track our progress. So we have to have a bar. So our bar that we've defined is 75% of the board and 50% of senior staff sharing a specific identity or characteristic. So that's something that we're using to measure our own progress. And that's why we're asking for that data. Thanks.
Thank you. There is a question here about work that is primarily the responsibility of statutory authorities, which is one of our eligibility criteria. Will or Jen, are you happy to just expand on it a little bit, please?
I can't see the question, but I can. Yeah, so we, as we said before, we want to maximise the impact that we make as a funder. So we wouldn't be duplicating work that would be potentially funded by statutory sources. We're obviously interested in work that is potentially influencing statutory policy, but we're an independent funder, and the value in that is our independence. So we're trying to work out where we can make the most impact with our funding. Does that address the question? I couldn't read the question I couldn't spot it in the Q&A, so I'm not sure whether I've approached.
No, that's all right. That's great. Thank you. I'm going to go on to a question here from Stuart about whether we've seen competition in trust fundraising in the last 5 years pre-pandemic, and if we've seen, I guess if we've seen a difference in terms of how that's changed more recently, and how do you see trust fundraising in the future, both at Esmée and the wider charitable sector?
I can take that. I think it's no secret that there is increased competition for funding from funders who are open, as Esmée is open to funding applications. And as I said, we're committed to being open. We're being really honest about the percentage of grants that we make that come from that open process versus relationships with organisations that we already have, and those that we're seeking out that are new. It is really challenging for everyone. I think funding sources across all of our sectors, even the environment sector, where things have been much better in recent years, are now proving a real challenge. And that is a threat to the success of the work that we're funding, never mind the work that we're not funding. So we're really aware of this. We're talking to other funders. I don't have solutions for this, but I think it is now like an existential threat to the impact of our strategy and our work. Sorry to be depressing.
Thanks, Dina. There's a question here from somebody from Leanne, about whether we welcome applications from charities earning over 1 million. We don't have a specific criteria around like maximum turnover, but what I would say is that we are, when assessing applications for work, we're also considering what, you know, like I think it was Jen who'd said about what additional value that we might bring as a funder, and part of that is also about, you know, how well resourced that organisation is and how likely we feel like they would be able to get funding for that for their work. So it's not quite a simple, straightforward answer, but hopefully that helps a little bit. But we don't have a specific criteria around that. So just looking through some of these questions to see. I'm going to ask Tom's question about funding for academic research. He's asked in relation to work for our natural world. And I guess, Will, it'd be great if you could talk a little bit more about some of the ways that we're funding this kind of work, but very much where we're being proactive and it's not something that is open to applications.
Yeah, so when it comes to research, I mean, we're not a research funder. So if it was kind of highly academic research looking at a particular area over a number of years, that is not something we would usually fund. Saying that, you know, there might be a bigger piece of work that we're funding where an element of that includes some research. And if that's the case, it would tend to be quite applied research, something that can kind of demonstrate something that then feeds into the wider success of the work, rather than being a standalone piece of academic research. So I hope that's clear.
Thanks, Will. Basola's asked whether we could spend a little bit more time talking about the types of work that we don't fund, so in our exclusions. So they've given an example around our exclusion around healthcare with a clinical basis, and they've given an example of providing counselling for women affected by gender-based violence. Would this be considered as not fundable? Jen, are you able to take that one?
Sure, yeah. So our website has a list of the things that we don't fund. That includes healthcare with a clinical basis. And that's one of the reasons for that is because that work is funded by other specialist funders. It's not our area of expertise at all. But also because, as we said before, we're focused on policy change. And so the work that's been described in this question, which is about counselling support, we would consider that to be very important, one-to-one service delivery support, which isn't something that we're focused on. So our work is about systemic change. And on that basis, we are supporting organisations that are involved in policy campaign and advocacy work. And as I said, we do fund organisations that do one-to-one support and kind of frontline service delivery, but what they're doing is they're doing that as well as the campaigning, policy and advocacy work, strategic change work, and we are funding them to do that strategic change bit, not the frontline service delivery bit.
Thanks, Jen. Okay, we've only got a few minutes left, so I'm just going to check with the panel if in case they've spotted a question they'd like to answer with that remaining time. Again, I want to say that we will answer the rest of these questions, or we'll do our best to answer the rest of these questions after the webinar and send everybody a link to a page with the answers. And if there's anything that needs clarification, then please feel free to email us at the communications@esmeefairbairn.org.uk email address. Whilst I give the panel a little bit more time to okay, there you go. Gina, do you want to go with it?
Yeah, I just wanted to answer a question about social media accounts. Someone asked, would you check our social media accounts if you're checking our website when you're looking at our expressions of interest? The reason we check someone's website is usually just to confirm that their area of work is in line with our strategy. That's why we're looking. What we're looking to fund is organisations whose goals match our own. And we're just looking to check that they have some sort of track record in this area, they're knowledgeable in that. This is the area. We're very unlikely to trawl through your social media posts to work out what you're saying. That's not the purpose. We're just trying to work out are you doing this kind of work? Is this what you usually do? That's it.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Gina. Are there any other questions that you've seen that you'd like to answer before we wrap up? It's probably difficult to do that. I get it. I'm going to just start sharing the last couple of slides. Just to highlight some of the additional resources that we have. So we do provide accessibility related support, that includes access payments of up to £500 where there might be something in our application process that is a barrier to you applying. So that might be extra staff support, it might be like BSL interpretation that you need, or you know, there's the link is in the slide, so you can learn a little bit more about that. We do also have a series of online free FAQs, which we try to keep up to date based on, you know, webinars and things like questions that we're getting. Like many other funders, we publish our funding on 360 Giving, and you can use their grant nav tool, which is a really great way to find funders of different types of work, and you can also search through our funding to see examples of organisations that we funded as well. But I would say that, yeah, even just beyond like us, there's a lot of really useful tips on it's a really useful tool for people to use, and we do also have links to previous webinars that we held, that give more specific information about each of our 3 strategic aims. I'm just going to stop sharing, and I think we will just wrap up there now. Gina, do you want to say final words?
Yeah, just want to say thank you, Luna. Thank you, Nana and Altan, for doing our interpretation. But thanks most of all to everyone for attending. I realise it can be frustrating if you have one question that isn't answered by the end, but you have asked it, and we will pass around a big list of questions. We will come up with answers to those, and we will share them on our website and share this with you as an attendee, along with a recording of this. Thank you so much to everyone for coming.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.